Testing, testing. 1 2 1 2. Test, test. Is this working? Can you guys hear me? He hates us. He started the stream. He hates us. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome in, welcome in. He's not talking. He hates us. He is talking. There we go. That's what I was looking for. Hey, hello. Alright, we hear you? Excellent, excellent. Alright. Was a bit worried for a second there with my mic setup. I've updated OBS, but for some reason the whole mic glitch hasn't fixed itself. So I might have to do a little bit more tinkering after the stream. Morning to you too, Zodic-kun. Phoenix streams, we hear you. Can we hear you? Hey, there we go. It's not 9 UTC plus 7. He hates us. Oh yeah, I need to make a tweet saying that I'm live. Hold on. Apologies. Just hold tight while I do a bit of typing. Do a bit of live posting. I'll just do the customary. Actually, I'll grab the I'll grab the oiled up chair picture that Noxin drew. I'm still waiting. Goals for the future. Goals for the future. Active by Figitech. Howdy, you just got out of the Superman movie in time to see ya. I'm glad you were able to show up. Use the variable C. He's oiling up. It says. Alright, hold on. Okay. Live now. Alright. Let me just find the emote real quick. It's so funny. Alright. Thank you, Noxin, for cooking with every picture that you draw. Alright. So, leather lube. Yeah, Hapini, in case you weren't there, basically, at the end of the interview that I did with Akiko, she shared with me that apparently you're supposed to periodically lubricate your leather chairs, your leather furniture. Now that I did not know, but that's new information that I've now integrated into my consciousness. At least if you're alive 1 hour later, like usual, I can say you're part of A Lure. To LA Cure. You want to show them the drawing I sent you? Oh wait, hold on, let me see. I might have missed the notif. Hold on. We'll save that for a future stream. Noxin. 100% missed. This message is sponsored by Kiko VT. Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm going to be saving that. I'm going to be saving that picture for a special occasion. Good job on the cursed drawing. Yes. I'm very glad that I have someone like you around. So that I can continue to get this art. Alright, so let me switch slides, switch scenes. There we go. Alright. Funny thing about the game, actually, around the same time that I started getting into Oshi Push, I started getting League of Legends streamers recommended in my YouTube algorithm again. And one of them is a European streamer by the name of Alois. He's a very, very funny, kind of chill personality. And I think his fandom popularized the meme, which was a remix of, I don't know if you guys remember this. It's a pretty I think at this point it's a pretty dead song, but Satisfaction, which was basically just people who are League players will know what this is referring to. It's basically a remix where it's just someone saying the word push, push, push over and over again. And now whenever I think about how Oshi push is just push, but in Japanese and then in English, I can't stop thinking about that song. I've got that song stuck in my head since that point. But I part of me is tickled by the idea of that becoming the the default soundtrack for Oshi Push whenever people play it. Hold on, let me see if I can actually link you guys to that. What I'm thinking of. Sorry, give me a second. Hold on. YouTube. You know that song? I'm sure you do. Wait, hold on. Let me grab the link. I can't play it on stream because I get instantly bashed by copyright. But let me just link it. There we go. Okay, there we go. Alright. Hold on. Sorry, give me a second. Alright. Let me go back to the slides. And there we go. Alright. Armchair, what up? Hello, hello, Gara. Welcome to the stream. Welcome to the stream. We're just about to dive into talking about the cards. Chet pulled the legendary blue PowerPoint. Yeah, this is a non-pink PowerPoint. I realized that for certain colors that are, you know, a part of Oshi Push's color scheme, putting them on a pink background might make them a little bit more difficult to see. And I do want to get a little bit of visual clarity in this, so. I think I know the song. Oh, there we go. Chair is a phase citizen, legal, come either way. True. New cards. These lists don't include the new cards, but I think that once they do all get added to Heroes mod, people are going to have the chance for better customization. I saw on Twitter that some people were saying that they wish that there was some way of playing it online or some way of playing it for free. And I just want to remind everyone that if you go to Tabletop Simulator and you go into the Tabletop Sim workshop, you have two mods. One of them by Vise and Chill, which is the two-player mod that allows you to play with the starter decks and or allows you to port in decks of your own so that you can play them against one other person. And also Heroes mod, Hero Urbano's mod, which is called Oshi Push Manager Pitch Deck, I believe, or Oshi Manager Pitch Deck, where all of the cards that are currently, well, most of the cards that are currently in the game are laid out according to their content genre and their color, and that allows you to basically experiment with deck lists, deck brews of your own. So between those two, that's how I got addicted to Oshi Push. And again, I want to emphasize, those mods are free. So long as you have somebody else who's willing to download Tabletop Sim, hop into it, and play a game of Oshi Push with you, there's nothing stopping you from just making your own decks and just porting them into the mod so that you can play them against one another. Billy? No anti-harassment warning. Let's go. Slight tangent. Did you see Leah's new birthday mousepad? I did. Sakana is really taking any chance to buff his talents possible. That's all I'll say about that. But, Likers are eating good. As Alki going to get more feet-themed cards? I don't know if you guys can be trusted with those. In any case, right, so If any of you were around for the Oshi push hand cams, where you watch the Face Connect girls unbox a booster box of packs and open them up on stream, and you thought from that the card game looked pretty interesting and you wanted to see how the game was actually played, this stream is for you. So, to explain how Oshi Push works as a game, we're gonna first have to start off, and a lot of you who watched my last Oshi Push stream will be familiar with this, but I'll just reiterate because I'll be explaining some things in slightly more detail than I did last time. The main cards that are going to be the draw of Oshi Push, the main reason why people are going to want to get this game, are all going to revolve around the creators that are a part of it, the VTubers that are a part of it. In other words, the Persona cards. Now, these are the cards that you build your entire deck around. Basically, if you've ever played something like Magic the Gathering Commander, it works in a very similar way, where this is the main card that you have on the side that you play, you use throughout the entirety of the game. Now, to break down what's actually on a Persona card, it has a content genre, basically in this case with the example here with Pippa, Zatsudan, which basically defines a type of content that is viewed as being central to their theme or their brand, and then also a color, and the color defines what their playstyle is. Green refers to economy and card draw, purple is control and disruption, and red is domination and influence. Now the next part of the card, here above their name you will see a little bit of extra text. Those are any additional effects that the card might bring to the table. Then you have this number next to the yellow hexagon. That is a bit counter. Basically, bits are the main resource that you use to play cards in the game, and your persona generates a set amount at the start of each round, and that set amount is outlined on this part of the card. Then you have the influence. This is the main metric that you use to compete over platforms. Now, Oshi Push works according to a prize card system, where essentially what you're going to be doing is you're going to be competing with your opponent in order to win over, to take control of a platform. Each platform comes with a certain amount of subscribers, and the goal of this game, the central conceit of this game, is to reach 1 million subscribers before your opponent does. Now, when it comes to deck building, the way that a Persona affects deck building is that every card in your deck has to either be the same genre as your Persona. In other words, if your Persona was Pippa, every card would have to either be a Zatsudan card, albeit a different color, or they could be a different genre, but the same color. In other words, every card in your deck needs to either match color with your Persona or match content genre with your Persona, meaning that Pippa can use Zatsudan cards of any color or red cards of any genre. Now, when it comes to additional deck building restrictions, every card in a deck, well, in addition to every card in the deck sharing the Persona's color or genre, you can only have a maximum of 3 copies of each card in your deck. Now, when it comes to what those cards actually are, they fall into 3 broad categories. First, upgrade cards. These are cards that permanently improve your Persona's abilities by increasing its stats and or enhancing whatever additional effects they have on there. Now, for example, let's say that you have Yabbit, right? For 6 bits, if you pay 6 bits, you can permanently upgrade your Persona, which means that now, instead of the Clash reward, basically referring to a bonus that you get whenever you win a Clash over a platform, don't worry if you don't know what that means, we'll get into that later. Instead of just gaining 1 bit, it increases the effectiveness of that ability by giving you 3 bits instead. It also gains an additional one-time effect, which can be activated by discarding the card from your hand. For example, here you can see that in the case that you don't want to play Yabbit, and in the case that you've already upgraded your Persona, because you can only do that once, using each upgrade card respectively. If you have an extra copy in your hand and you want to be able to use it for something, it does have the ability to discard it from your hand in order to give your Persona +2 influence during the clash. And as you can see, in addition to enhancing the effects and adding in a new one, it also increases the stats that were originally on the base persona. Instead of just giving you 3 bits per round, Yabbit gives you 5 bits per round. Instead of only offering 4 influence on whichever platform it's on, it now offers 7 influence on whichever platform it's on. The next type of card is an action card, basically a one-time effect that can be played at any stage during the round, unless stated otherwise. Now, for example, we can use... Hold on, let me just bring this forward. Chew on cables. Play only if your persona is Pipkin Pippa, and only during a clash. Costs 1 bit, purple Zatsudon action card, which says, set an opposing persona's influence to 0 this clash. All opponents can't play actions this clash. Pretty powerful effect. However, the only, I suppose, limiter on this card's effectiveness is the fact that you can only play it during a clash. However, again, the main draw of action cards is their one-time effect, and usually the effect is strong enough that they have to be gated behind being single-use only. And then finally, and this is one of the main things that you're going to be playing with so that you can build up influence over platforms and win the game, etc., etc., you have content cards, which can only be played during the content phase of a round and only on the platform currently occupied by your persona. After all, if you're going to upload content onto a platform, you actually have to be there on that platform. It increases your influence on the platform until it is deleted by an effect or the platform is captured, in which case everything on it is deleted as well. And as an example, we have Math Stream. For 3 bits, green Zatsudon content card that says the bit cost of content cards your opponents play on this platform is increased by 1 and it gives you 5 influence. Essentially the way that it works is you play a content card for, you pay 3 bits, you play that on a platform, and then after that round is over, even if your persona goes somewhere else, the content card stays on that platform until it is either deleted or the platform is captured by somebody. Do all upgrade cards have alternative actions? Yes. And that is something that we're going to be discussing in a little bit. So, I've been talking a lot about, the cards that you use to actually play the game, but also what are these platform cards that people have to, try to win, try to capture in order to actually progress in the game? This is what they look like, and, well, their various components are as follows. As I mentioned before, each platform has a subscriber count. Basically, how many subscribers you gain by capturing the platform. The first player to reach 1 million subs, as I mentioned before, will win the game. For example, Sad Girl Company is a platform that has that little number next to the star counter of 3, and also has 500,000 subscribers, sorry. So essentially, if you were to capture this platform, all you need to do is capture another larger platform that has 500 or more thousand subs, and then you'd win the game. Now, each platform also has a popularity threshold. Basically, every time you win a clash over a platform, you get to put a popularity counter, a popularity token onto that platform. When you have enough tokens to meet the threshold, in other words, for Sad Girl Company, you need 3, you win the platform, you capture the platform. So, if at any point you manage to hit 3 popularity tokens on Sad Girl Company, you instantly capture the platform, and then everyone ends up tallying up how many subscribers they have. If someone happens to have 1 million or more after that platform is captured, then that person wins the game. Now, there are 2 types of platforms. The first are independent platforms, which don't provide any rewards upon winning a clash. However, they do grant certain cards a bonus effect in order to make up for this. For example, Birthday Special. For 1 bit, a red creative content card that says, while this card is on an independent platform, it gains +3 influence. Now, the card starts off with 3 influence, but if you were to play it onto an independent platform, then it would be a 1-bit 6 influence card, which is pretty massive in terms of cost to influence ratio. Now, the second type of cards are non-independent Second type of platform cards, are non-independent platforms. These are platforms that give you a clash reward, which is a bonus that triggers every time you win a clash. For example, Sudden Clips is a platform that has 300,000 subscribers, a popularity threshold of 2, and has a clash reward that says you may return 1 content card from your trash to your hand. So every time you win a clash over this platform, you get to dig through your discard pile, which is what they call which is what the trash pile is, and basically bring back 1 content card, put that back in your hand. Pretty self-explanatory. Now, the way that the board state actually looks, the way that it works, the way that you play Oshi Push and what you play it on, works as follows. First, you have the studio. This is your neutral starting zone that your persona returns to in between rounds. If you've played Magic the Gathering Commander, then this is basically the equivalent of the command zone, right? Where you put your persona right at the start of the game, and that's where they go back to it after every round. Then you have the bank, which is where you store your bits, where you keep track of how many bits you have and how many resources you are actually in possession of, so that you can keep playing more cards. Under each platform, and usually you have 3 arranged out horizontally like this, you have an influence counter for either player, which tallies how much influence a player holds over the platform by combining the total from the persona and or content cards that are present on the platform. Again, I'll be showing you guys how this actually works using a hypothetical game state in a few minutes, so don't worry about that. Then you have your platform deck, which is a deck of 5 unique platform cards that each player builds in addition to their main deck, which consists of 40 cards. Now, at the start of the game, you draw 5 cards, however your maximum hand size is 7. At the beginning of each round, each player draws 1 card from their deck and then discards down to 7 if necessary. And then finally you have trash, or the trash pile, which is basically your discard pile. Where is the low effort clips reference? Well, I mean, they do have sudden clips, which could be one. Missing the start of the Oshi push because of Pippa feels apt. True. Now, basically, to break down how rounds actually work, because that's the main way that the game is divided in terms of the gameplay loop. Few things. First, rounds are divided into 3 phases: the content phase, the platform phase, and the refresh phase. And the phases themselves are divided into turns, which each player takes intermittently. Players may take only 1 action per turn, which basically just means either playing a card or activating an ability. During any of their turns, a player may choose to simply pass their turn without taking any actions. If 2 players pass in a row, the round progresses to the next phase, or clash. During the content phase, each player chooses a platform for their persona to start on, with the starting player choosing theirs first. This is when players may play content cards. Now, the platform phase is where things start to get a little bit more complex, because this is where people are going to be clashing over platforms and trying to actually win the game. During the platform phase, players start clashing over platforms, with the starting player choosing whether to clash over the platforms from right to left or left to right. Essentially, because of the fact that you have your platform set out horizontally like this, the starting player chooses whether they want the order of the clashes to happen, either starting from the left platform moving over to the right, or starting from the right platform moving over to the left. The only thing is you can't choose to start in the middle. It has to be from either extreme, right or left. Each clash ends when 2 turns are passed in a row. The player with more influence over the platform by the end of the clash will win said clash and place a popularity token on the platform. If a player reaches a platform's popularity threshold at any point during the platform phase, that platform will be captured instantly. After any platform is captured, subscriber counts are tallied, and then that's when people either win the game or the game goes on. refresh phase, and then finally, after the platform phase is over, you have the refresh phase, where personas are returned to the studio and their bits are added to the bank. Now, all of this is just, mucho texto, me explaining how the game works using just, words, right? But even in the last stream that I did about Oshi Push, I didn't actually demonstrate a hypothetical way that the game can be played out. And that's going to be a sort of gap in knowledge that I'm going to try to remedy here. So, to give you an idea of how the content phase and the platform phase actually works, let's say that we have a hypothetical board state and a hypothetical game state, right? Let's say you're playing Pipkin Pippa. You're the starting player. You started off this round during the content phase by adding your bits to the bank. Pippa's base persona adds 3 bits to your bank at the start of each round, and so you have 3 bits to work with. Let's say that you have a starting hand of 5 cards, and the 5 cards are as follows. First, Birthday Special. While this card is on an independent platform, the card gains +3 influence. Base influence 3, 1 bit cost. We've already talked about this. Then Math Stream, another card that we already talked about, 3 bits for 5 influence plus an additional effect. Then you have Vomit Drawer, a purple Zatsudan action card that costs 2 bits and says you may delete 1 opposing content card with 6 influence or less. You have an upgrade card, Yabbit, which we've already talked about as well. And finally, you have another content card called Debut Stream, a purple Zatsudan content card that costs 1 bit, has 2 influence, but also has a discard effect that says you may move your persona to this platform, by which it means any platform. Use only during a clash. And so, when you're the starting player and you're looking at your hand, you need to choose which platform would be best for you to start on. Now, there are multiple things that you can do. These are your starting platforms. Yappers, a non-independent platform that has 600,000 subscribers, but requires you to win at least 4 clashes over in order to capture it. However, to offset that, the clash reward is that you gain 1 bit every time you win a clash. Then you have Sad Girl Company. As we discussed before, it is an independent platform with 500,000 subscribers and a popularity threshold of 3. No rewards for winning any clashes, but it does have synergy with Birthday Special. And then finally you have Sudden Clips. 300,000 subscribers, a popularity threshold of 2, and you get a clash reward of getting to return a content card to your hand after every instance that you win a clash. Sorry, give me a second. Now, you have a few options in terms of what you can do. You can either send Pippa to start on Yappers, or you can send her to start on Sad Girl Company. Now, if you go to any platform and you choose to spend all 3 bits in order to play, let's say, for example, Math Stream, yes, you do end up spending your bits more efficiently during that round. However, you also leave yourself in a position where you can't really play any additional cards, and you only get 5 influence out of it if you just start on any platform and then you choose to use Math Stream as your opening play. Alternatively, though, if you choose specifically to start on Sad Girl Company, what you can do is then spend 1 bit in order to play Birthday Special, put Birthday Special onto that platform, and now for the cost of only 1 bit instead of 3, you get 6 influence over a platform, not 5. And you still have 2 bits left over, just in case your opponent plays a content card, tries to contest you either on this platform or has a content card on another platform you don't like. You have 2 bits left over where you can still use in order to play Vomit Drawer at any point during the rest of the round. So let's say, for example, during this game, you chose to start by putting Pippa on Sad Girl Company. That this is the game state that you have by the time you reach the platform phase of the round. You pass a turn, your opponent passes a turn, and now you move on to the next phase of the round, which is the platform phase. Let's say that Pippa, you put your persona and you put birthday special both onto Sad Girl Company. Now when you add up the influence totals from both of these cards, Pippa gives you 4 influence and birthday special gives you 6. So in total, you now have 10 influence over Sad Girl Company. So long as your opponent doesn't do anything to either remove you or your content from that platform, you will probably win the clash over this platform. Now let's say that your opponent was playing a Tenma deck, and they'd set up on Yappers. Now Tenma gives 4 influence, and the Tenma player has played Courtroom Roleplay, a red experience content card that costs 2 bits, has 4 influence, but also has an additional effect that says, while any opponent has 3 or more cards in their hand, this card gains +3 influence. And since you currently have 4 cards in hand, this is a content card that effectively only costs 2 bits, but gives 7 influence. And that's what Tenma is working with currently. Hence why she has 11 influence over Yappers. Now, as the starting player, you get to choose which direction the clashes resolve in. You can either choose to start going from left to right, in which case Yappers would end up resolving itself first, then you would move on to Sad Girl Company, and finally to Sudden Clips. Or you can choose to go in the opposite direction, where you start on Sudden Clips, then you go to Sad Girl Company, and finally you finish with Yappers. Now this is where one of the more complex parts of the game starts kicking in, because at the beginning, when you're just learning the game for the first time, you might not think there's too much of a difference depending on whether you choose to resolve the clashes from left to right or right to left. However, based on the game state, in other words, based on where your opponent has set up, what the platforms you're clashing over are, and what their effects are if you win a clash on them, there can be a pretty significant difference between whether you go left to right or right to left. Let's say, for example, that you choose to go from left to right in terms of clash order. Right now, there are a few things that you can do, right? So as the starting player, a few things you can do. So one of the things that you want to take into account of is what happens if I allow my opponent to win a clash over a platform. Like I said before, Yappers has a clash reward built into the platform where every time you win a clash, you get 1 bit. Tenma starts off with 3 bits at the beginning of the round, and she has spent 2 bits in order to play Courtroom Roleplay, which means that she has 1 bit left over. However, if she were to win the clash over this platform, if you just simply allowed her to do so without any sort of intervention, Tenma's clash reward would trigger on her persona, which means that she would draw a card. Now, what that would mean is it combines with the platform clash reward so that if she were to win a clash over Yappers, she would gain an additional card in hand, so now you'd have to deal with 5 cards instead of just 4, and she would also go from just having 1 bit to 2. Now, Tenma has a tendency to snowball quite heavily. So let's say, for example, that you wanted to deny her that advantage very early on in the game. There are 2 things that you can do. You can start by using Debut Stream's discard effect. So by tossing it into your trash, you would then get the ability to move Pipkin Pippa over to Yappers. So now you would go from having 0 influence on the platform to having 4 influence on the platform. But you still have a problem, because 4 is not bigger than 11. Even if you moved Pippa over, Tenma would still end up winning the clash. However, then what you can do is you can use the 2 remaining bits that you have in your bank in order to play Vomit Drawer, targeting Courtroom Roleplay, and also sending that over to the trash. Now you have 0 bits. However, you've compensated for that by now equalizing the playing field so that both you and Tenma have only 4 influence over the platform, resulting in a tie where nothing happens, but more importantly, denying the Tenma player extra bits and extra cards in hand. Then, the clash would move over to the next platform, you would resolve the effects. Now you've gone from having 10 influence over it to only having 6 influence over it. However, since you still have more influence than your opponent, you still get a popularity token on that platform. And then you move over to sudden clips, and because no one has anything on that platform, nothing happens. And so by the end of this entire first round, you are in a position where you have a popularity token on one platform, you have content on one platform, you've denied your opponent an extra card and an extra bit, and you still have 2 cards in hand of your own. And you have 0 bits in your bank. Now, if we evaluate where this is, if we evaluate the resources we currently have, which is 0 bits and only 2 cards in hand out of the 4 that we started off with, I don't think it's very controversial to say that that wasn't a very worthwhile trade. Because yes, we did deny the Tenma player potentially early snowball, but we had to spend a lot of resources in order to do that. Now, there is a way of pulling off the exact same play of denying your opponent any cards, denying your opponent the additional card draw, the additional bits, but doing so in a way that does conserve your resources just a little bit more. And in order to do that, what you would have to do is go in the opposite direction, because there's one other aspect of choosing to resolve the clashes from left to right in this particular scenario that I haven't talked about yet. And that is, the reason why allowing the Tenma player to gain a card is extra bad if they're playing. Allowing your opponent to gain an extra card and an extra bit in this scenario is extra bad, specifically if you're playing against Tenma. See, what would happen, like I said before, if Tenma were to win that clash over Yappers, is she would now go from having 1 bit available in her bank to having 2. And the problem is, Tenma has a lot of cards that remove content if she has 2 bits. For example, Yell at Fish, a purple experience action card that costs 2 and says you may delete 1 content card with bit cost less than the number of cards you have in hand. And since Tenma will have 3 cards in hand after playing this, she can blast Birthday Special whenever she likes, if she has this card. And the second one being Succumb to Cringe, another purple experience action card that costs 2 bits and says you may return 1 content card with that costs 3 or less to its owner's hand. Meaning that in the middle of a clash, she can send this back to your hand and you won't be able to replay it until the next round. Now, the thing is, right, when you look at all of the platform rewards, the platform clash rewards, something might stand out to you, which is Sudden Clips. Sudden Clips says if you win the clash on the platform, you may return 1 content card from your trash to your hand. If you chose to resolve in the order of left to right, one of the things that you can do is establish a lead in terms of the overall game state by putting a popularity token not on 1 platform, but 2. Essentially what you can do is you win the clash on the middle platform, you get a popularity token, you put it there, and then at the beginning of clashing over the next platform, Sudden Clips, you discard Debut Stream, move Pippa over, and now since you're the only one with some sort of influence, since you're the only one with some sort of influence over the platform, you win. And then the platform reward triggers, and you can put Debut Stream back into your hand. So you've basically established a lead on 2 platforms without ever having to even take a card out of your own hand. Oh yeah, and also, since this is Pippa we're talking about, you can essentially go up to 4 bits, because you've won a clash with your persona on the middle platform, and then you've won a clash with your persona on the right platform. So by the end of this entire exchange, you have 4 bits instead of just 2, and you have 4 cards instead of just 2. Right? So again, which platforms are currently in play will very much affect what strategies you choose to go with. However, the thing is, Very common mistake that may happen, and this is a very, I suppose, a mistake that's natural at when you're just learning the game for the first time, is sometimes you may get overeager when it comes to trying to make certain plays. For example, if you don't wait until you've already won the clash on Sad Girl Company before you choose to discard debut stream and try to move Pippa over here in order to set up for that later clash, after Tenma ends up winning the clash over Yappers and going up to 2 bits instead of just 1, when you move over to Sad Girl Company and begin clashing over that platform, the Tenma player can spend those 2 bits and play Yell at Fish, for example, getting rid of Birthday Special, which means that you now have 0 influence over Sad Girl Company, and you lose that possible lead that you might have been able to have. And so, as a result of that, generally speaking, you have to wait before pulling the trigger when it comes to making plays, such as the one that I just outlined. However, there is an alternative way that you can make it perhaps a little bit less complex in terms of getting to both benefit off of, sudden clips, establish a lead on 2 platforms instead of just 1, while also denying your opponent the added bit and card draw. And that is if you choose to resolve the clashes in the opposite direction. So if you choose to start on sudden clips and then move towards the left, instead of starting on Yappers and then moving towards the right. See, what you can do is if you start on sudden clips, because it resolves in terms of order from right to left, so you go from sudden clips to Sad Girl Company to Yappers, until the very end of the platform phase, the Tenma player never has a chance to go up to 2 bits, so you instantly eliminate the risk of having to deal with possible removal. So here, what you can do is you can start off the clash at sudden clips by instantly discarding debut stream, moving Pippa over, and assuming they have no response, you now win the clash over that platform. You get a popularity token, and you get to return debut stream back to your hand. Then you move on to the middle platform. And now, because Birthday Special is still on there, you just win the clash without having to have your persona there as well. Now, you do go up to 3 bits because your persona was on sudden clips when you won the clash there, but you don't gain an additional bit from Pippa's clash reward because Pippa wasn't present on the platform when the clash over Sad Girl Company was won. So essentially what would happen here is you don't have to worry about the Tenma player suddenly blasting your content card so that you would have to either be there using your persona or you wouldn't be able to win at all because they're still stuck at just 1 bit. Then what you can do is that entire play that I outlined earlier, where once again, you discard debut stream, you get 2 uses of it out of during this stage of the round rather than just 1. You move Pippa back over to Yappers, then you use 2 bits in order to blast Courtroom Roleplay, because the moment you play Vomit Drawer, you go down to only having 2 cards in hand, and Courtroom Roleplay becomes a 4 influence content card instead of a 7, and now your opponent doesn't have any presence on the platform, and they've been denied a bit and card draw, except now you have 1 bit left over, and you have a lead on 2 platforms. So, crazy how much counters you have to keep track of? Oh yeah. This is quite a bit. Yeah, this is quite a lot. But my point in trying to show this off is the game has a lot of complexity in terms of how things can play out. Because, very simply, if what you wanted to do was just, learn the game, it's a very simple matter of just, choosing which platforms that you want to start at, then playing a bunch of content cards and trying to establish an influence lead, and then going from there. However, once you start getting a hang of, some of the mechanics, like, for example, the order in which you want platforms to resolve their clashes in, then the game starts to get exponentially more, there's more that you can potentially do, I suppose. There's a playmaking potential in terms of what you can accomplish with the cards that you have in your deck and in your hand. So, another thing is, there exist effects in this game that allow you to move content cards from one platform to another in the middle of a clash. Now, let's say, for example, that I had one such card and I was playing Pippa in this exact scenario, right? Where the Tenma player has a content card on their platform. Let's say, for example, that instead of starting here, the Tenma player started here, was trying to contest me for the same platform, right? And given this scenario, if we were to just straightforward go for a clash in between the two of us, I would lose. Because Tenma has 11 influence over the platform, I only have 10. However, because of the way that the clashes resolve from left to right or right to left, once a clash is already resolved on a platform, any additional influence that gets added to it afterwards, at least until the next round, doesn't do anything. So if I had a card that, for example, if I chose to resolve from right to left, right, we start on sudden clips and then we go over to the middle. Let's say, for example, that we don't choose to do the play by, discarding debut stream or whatever. We just let the platform clash happen. Nothing, again, no player has any sort of presence on the platform, so nothing happens. This platform's clash resolves, and then we move on to clashing over Sad Girl Company. If I had a card that could move Tenma's content over to sudden clips, it would end up doing nothing for the rest of this round, while also reducing the amount of influence I now have to contend with, because Tenma would now go down to 4 influence over Sad Girl Company instead of 11. And this is why platform hopping is a very big deal in this game, because depending on which order you choose to resolve the clashes in, left to right or right to left, you can pull off a lot of shenanigans by either moving your own cards from one platform to another, or forcing your opponent to move theirs from one platform to another. It's interesting how the opponent's bids can be controlled with the choice of clash direction. Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things that makes the game quite rewarding to learn. Because again, like I said, it does have a pretty simple gameplay loop of, you choose a platform, your opponent chooses a platform, you both play content cards, and then you or your opponent, depending on who starts, gets to choose whether you want the clashes to resolve left to right or right to left, and then you keep trying to capture the platform cards, at least until someone wins. Now, it is perfectly possible for a game of Oshi Push to go on, an entire game of Oshi Push to go on, without any player interacting with the other even a bit, right? However, again, should you choose to interact with your opponent, there are a lot of ways that you can do so. And in terms of the ways that you can do so, part of those is tied to the actual card effects that they've put into the game. One of the easiest ones to understand, one of the most basic ones to understand, is discard, right? Basically, what I said before. You may, at any point during the round, unless stated otherwise, discard the card from your hand in order to trigger a specific effect, a one-time effect. For example, VTuber Coffee. Normally, if you were to play it, it would be a green experience content card that costs 1 bit and gives you 2 influence on whichever platform you choose to play it. However, you can choose to also instead discard it from your hand and then gain 1 bit. Another card effect that you have is Activate, basically an effect that can be manually triggered once per round. And this effect can be used at any stage during the round except the turn that the card was played. And as an example, you have Halloween Special, a green creative content card that costs 8 bits, has 14 influence, and also has an additional effect that says activate, play 1 action card from your trash that costs 3 bits or less for free. So basically a recurring value engine that you just have sitting on a platform. Next, you have Kickback, basically a little bonus reward that triggers every time you lose a clash over the platform that the content is placed on. So this is basically a kind of, a consolation prize, if you like to think of it that way. If you play a kickback card onto a platform and then you end up losing a clash, at least you get a little bit of you get a small amount of bits in return to compensate for that. Now, kickback is not a very strong effect at the moment, but I do believe that they will be adding cards into the game that do make it stronger in the future. And then finally, you have dominating, a keyword that basically means when you have more content cards on a platform than your opponent does. So let's say, for example, that I was contesting a platform against an opponent that had royalty song, and I only had continued gameplay. Now, normally, if it was just one-on-one, continued gameplay was the only content card I had on the platform compared to my opponent's royalty song, I would lose the clash, because this card only gives 6 influence, whereas royalty song gives 8. However, if I were to have even one other content card, this would start giving 9 instead of 6, because it says while you are dominating this platform, this card gains +3 influence. So again, in order to activate a dominating effect, you would just have to have more content cards on a platform than your opponent does. Halloween Special is too powerful, but I love Halloween, so I give it a pass. Yeah, Mollington really loves that card. He's been trying to look for every way to abuse it possible. So, another thing when it comes to the cards that they've printed. In addition to every Persona card, in addition to the upgrade cards that enhance your Persona's effects permanently, you also have a Persona exclusive and a Persona synergy card. A Persona exclusive card is any card that has the additional condition of play only if your Persona is X VTuber, right? So in this particular case, Feat, a Holy Deep Dive, is a green creative content card that costs 5, has 8 influence, but has the condition that you are only allowed to play it if you are currently playing a Leah deck. The Clash Reward is pretty powerful. If you have at least 5 more influence than your opponents at this platform, draw 2 cards. Card draw is a very strong effect in Oshi Push as it is with any game. And so this Clash Reward being on the card, well, you can probably see why the people who made the game, the devs who made Oshi Push, decided to gatekeep this effect behind only a specific Persona. And then in addition to that, you also have synergy cards where any Persona, any deck is able to use this card, but it has an additional effect if you're playing a particular Persona. For example, Internet Historian is a red creative action card that costs 2 bits and has the effect of returning 1 content card from your trash to your hand. Pretty simple. For 2 bits, you get to trade this card for a card in your trash. However, if you are playing Leah specifically, it has the added effect of allowing you to return 2 content cards from your trash instead of just 1, which means that instead of just being a straightforward 1-for-1 trade, now you have an additional card in your hand that you have retrieved from your trash. So again, cards that have a bonus effect depending on whether you're repping a particular Persona. Now, I understand that I did kind of info/lore dump quite a bit on you guys, and how, you know, a lot of the mechanics and things may have gone over your head if I explained them a little poorly, which I admit is a possibility. However, if you would like to see how a game actually plays, I highly recommend heading over to Lord Mollington's channel, where he has several streams playing Oshi Push against various people, myself included. And if you want to get a general impression of how the game actually works when you have an opponent in front of you, you're both playing cards, you're both playing decks, I highly recommend going over to check out, you know, the videos on his channel as well. However, having explained how the mechanics work, why platform hopping is such a powerful effect in this game, now we get to the fun part, which is the deck ideas. Because Oshi Push has created starter decks to help people learn how the game works. They have 1 Pippa starter deck and 1 Tenma starter deck. The Pippa starter deck is an aggro deck. The Tenma starter deck is a kind of I suppose, a kind of control deck. However, the starter decks can only give you so much, and I think that while they're a good starting point, as is implied in the name, they don't really show the entirety. This isn't really their job. Again, it's not really a gripe with the starter decks, but more so telling you guys, if you want to know more about the game, why you could go beyond that. They don't really do a great job at showing you the full capabilities of the sheer range of different playstyles and strategies you can adopt with this game. And so, if you go over to, like I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, Tabletop Simulator, you go into the Community Workshop mods, you will find a mod by Hiro Urbano called Oshi Pitch Manager Deck, which is basically just a mod that contains all of the cards, or most of the cards that are currently in the game, sorted by color and content genre, and separated by action and content. And essentially what you can do is get a general idea as to what cards are available in the game, and then start building your own custom decks. And I have 3 custom deck lists that can hopefully show off just how many different ways you can play the game. And those 3 decks are, in contrast to the last stream where I showed off 3 Tenma decks, 1 Nasa deck, 1 Leah deck, and 1 Iori deck. Nasa Homerus, Leah Necro, and Iori Infinite. And we'll start off with the Nasa deck. I have been summoned. I knew you would pop up when I started talking about feet. Yeah, I would agree the starter decks are very weak, don't show what the game... Yeah, no, funny story that Akiko shared during our interview. I don't know if there's anyone who didn't watch it, you'll get to hear it here. Apparently, after playing the Tenma starter deck, someone who showed up at one of the cons, I think this was Offkai, where Oshi Push was set up at, they went up to Tenma during a meet and greet, and they outright said to her, "Your deck is one of the weakest in the game." Which is not true at all. But again, I understand why if the only experience you have with the game is starter, then I understand why you might get that impression. Platform hopping is similar to tap, untap, double strike, it seems, assuming Clash Effects doesn't have a limit. Yes, basically. That's a good comparison, actually, Mio. If you lose in Oshi Push, you get sent to your Oshi's Shadow Realm. True. Infinite deck in set 1? Yes, infinite decks in set 1, actually, because Tenma has one as well. But to start off with, so we're coming up with the Nasa deck. What you want to do, actually, this is a thing not just specifically with Nasa, but with any deck that you're building with any TCG, right? Usually how deck building works is you look at a card, you look at its strengths and weaknesses, and you try to figure out how you make those work to their utmost ability. Now, with Nasa, 2 things stand out. One is when you look at her upgrade cards, which you usually want to include at least 5 of in your deck, right? 4 or 5 of in your deck. They have an additional effect where if you discard them from your hand, you can move your persona to any other platform in the middle of a clash. So one of her innate strengths is the ability to platform hop. However, the second thing is when you look at Nasa's passive effect, she has an effect that states, while you have 0 bits, Nasa gains +3 influence. In other words, Nasa gets a power spike every time you hit 0 bits in your bank. In other words, you are going to want to try to spend all of your bits every round so as to pump up Nasa's power. And once you get to 0 bits, you basically have a souped up persona that you can start shooting to any platform you want in the middle of the clashes. And when you put together platform hopping with a 0-bit power spike, what you get is an effect where not only do you want to constantly have no bits left in your bank, but you also want to avoid trying to only set up on one platform and rather keep hopping around to different ones so that you can establish a lead on as many platforms as possible. Hence why I've called this a Homerus deck. Now, in terms of card synergies, The first part of the game plan is platform hopping, right? Not only allowing your persona to go from different platform to different platform, but also forcing your opponent to make awkward platform hops as well. Now, when it comes to moving your own persona, you have access to debut stream because it is purple and because it is Zatsudan. You know, as we talked about before, purple Zatsudan content card costs 1 bit, 2 influence, but also has the additional effect of allowing you to move your persona to a different platform if you discard this from your hand in the middle of a clash. Same thing with both of Nasa's upgrade cards. Regardless of whether you go with her tier 1 upgrade or her tier 2 upgrade, you get to move your persona to a different platform in the middle of a clash if you discard this from your hand. On top of that, you also have a card called Potion, a purple Zatsudan action card that costs 2 bits and says, play only during a clash, you may move one persona or content card from this platform to another platform. Then, if your persona is Michiru, you may move another persona or content card from that platform to this platform. Now, since we're not playing Michiru, that second part of the effect is irrelevant. However, you still get the option of moving one persona or content card from this platform, with a platform, to another. And the thing is, Potion doesn't specify a friendly persona or content card, meaning that you can target your opponent with this as well. So what you can do is you can start left to right or right to left. You resolve the clash on one platform, so now that platform and the content on it is pretty much irrelevant until the next round. You can play Potion, force your opponent to move themselves, their persona card or one of their content cards, away from the platform you're currently clashing over onto the platform that is already resolved, and then you essentially remove a portion of their influence for the rest of that round. Now, this is just one half of it, because like I said before, another half of what you want to do in this deck is get to 0 bits. And in other words, you can very often end up surprising your opponent, jumping your opponent with a lot more influence than they thought you might have had on your persona if you are able to hit 0 influence in the middle of a clash. And in order to help with that, we have 3 more cards. First is I'll Crush You, a 0-bit, the only 0-bit card in the game so far, red Zatsudan action card that has the stipulation you can only play this if your persona is Nasa, and it says, for this round, your persona gains Clash Reward. Look at the top 3 cards of your deck. You may play one content card that you find there to any platform, paying its bit cost normally. Put the other cards on the top of your deck in any order. So essentially what you are able to do is, if you are in a spot where you are very comfortably going to win a clash, but you haven't used the ability to move Nasa over to another platform yet, you can give yourself a sudden buff by playing I'll Crush You, giving Nasa that clash reward. Then when you win that clash, you get to look at the top 3 cards of your deck, and then if there is one content card in the top 3 cards of your deck that you can play in order to bring yourself down to 0 bits, all of a sudden, not only have you established an influence lead on any platform of your choice, but you've also buffed up Nasa by going down to 0 bits. So that now if you were to move her to another platform, it becomes disgustingly easy to win out of nowhere. The other card that helps you get down to 0 bits is a card called No Show, a purple creative action card that costs X bits. Play only during a clash. For each bit that you spend to play this card, choose one opposing content card on any platform to lose -3 influence this clash. So basically, whenever you play this card, you choose one platform to play it on. Then, once this card resolves, you may choose any number of content cards on that platform equal to the amount of bits that you spent to play this, and each of them lose -3 influence for each instance of, for each bit that you paid. Now, one of the things with this card, one of the things that makes it such a great late game card, good regardless of whether you play it during the mid or the late game, is the card doesn't specify whether you have to choose different content cards on the same platform. Which means, let's say you pay 3 bits in order to play No Show. You can either choose up to three content cards on the same platform, and each of them gets -3 influence for the rest of the clash. Or you can choose one card 3 times, and that card ends up losing 9 influence in total for the rest of that clash. And this is why it's such a good late game card as well, because since your objective as NASA is to go down to 0 bits, you can basically end up emptying your bank at a moment's notice by just spending all of your bits on no-show. And when you get up to NASA's, as you can see, with NASA's tier 2 upgrade card, you get 6 bits per round. And if you just wanted to spend all of that in the late game by targeting one big content card that your opponent has played, you can essentially target that same card up to 6 times using no-show, giving it -18 influence. So it's basically tantamount to removal. Yes, the effect is temporary, but that's what you can do with this card. It has a great deal of flexibility in how you can choose to use it. And then finally, you have Charity Event. A green Zatsudan content card that costs 2 bits, has 4 influence, and also Kickback, gain 1. Now the reason why I include Charity Event in this deck is not only so that you can try to play it off the top using I'll Crush You as a cheap content card, but also because potentially you can get more bits in the middle of the platform phase if you end up going wide, and then as a result of that losing a clash over one platform. You still get 1 bit as compensation, and then you could then use that 1 bit for some other effect, like more debuffs via no-show, for an example. I said temporary. I've got a question. Can no-show work with Halloween Special? I don't think it can, because it says X bits, and Halloween Special always costs whatever you it always plays whatever you choose from your discard pile for 0. So you could play it, but it just wouldn't have any effect. Now the other cards though, like I said, are all cheap content cards, because as I said before, since I'll Crush You is usually something that you want to do in order to get down to 0 bits, and you may play anything from the top 3 cards of your deck. Usually, especially in the early game, you don't have that many bits to work with, so you don't want content cards that cost 7 or 8 or 9 or whatever. You usually want content cards that cost around, 3, maybe at most 6. So for this deck, because I've chosen to go with a strategy where I try to go wide as opposed to just locking down one platform, hence why I said, home risk, because you're basically squatting, I've chosen a lot of content cards that cost 3 or less to make up the bulk of this deck, and some of them are the following. Stargazing, a red Zatsudan content card that costs 1 bit but gives a whopping 6 influence just for free, right off the bat with no condition, and the only condition is that you have to be playing NASA. This is hands down the strongest bit to influence ratio of any card in the game. And again, the only reason why it's not, broken is because only one persona is allowed to play it, NASA. Second, Edgelord Behavior, a purple Zatsudan content card that costs 2 bits, has 3 influence, which might seem like a bad ratio until you read the effect, which says, when played, you may delete 1 opposing content card on this platform with 5 influence or less, meaning that you get to essentially use this. It doubles as not only a content card that gives you an influence lead over the platform that you play it on, but it also acts as removal for any cards that your opponent has played before you drop this onto the board. And then finally, you have Math Stream, which, as we've talked about before, is a green Zatsudan content card that costs 3 bits, has 5 influence, but increases the cost of all content cards your opponents play on the same platform by 1. And again, this is the reason why we have, these various content cards with different costs, is just so we can manage to hopefully get down to 0 regardless of how many bits we'd already spent, right? Let's say we spent 2 bits during the content phase and, I'll Crush You has just triggered, Now you get to play Stargazing just in case, so you can get NASA down to 0. Let's say you spent 1 bit during the content phase, and you're trying to cheat out a card using I'll Crush You to get NASA down to 0. Now you can play Edgelord Behavior. And the same thing applies if you spent 0 bits during the content phase. Now you can cheat out Math Stream, and also fuck with how much your opponent was fuck with how your opponent was planning to spend their bits for that round as well. Now, in addition to that, since we already have a strategy of hopping around to different platforms, it therefore follows that, in terms logically speaking, that it would make sense to include cards that also synergize with having content on multiple platforms at the same time. And that's why we also have an added plan of going wide with the content, not just by sending NASA around to different platforms. Gorilla Stream. A red Zatsudan content card that costs 1 bit, has 2 influence, but has the added effect that you can play this on any platform, which means that you don't have to wait until your persona is on a platform in order to play it on that platform. You can just drop it wherever you like. Then you have React Meta, a green Zatsudan action card that costs 2 bits and says you may draw 1 card for each platform where you have at least 1 content card. In most scenarios with this deck, you can end up playing it as a 2-bit draw 2, which is already very good. But more often, especially in the mid game, where you have an established presence or at least 1 content card on every platform, this becomes a 2-bit draw 3, which in any TCG is insane. And then finally, to round it out, we have Yapping, a red Zatsudan content card that costs 3 bits, has 4 influence, but says it gains +3 influence for each other platform where you have Zatsudan content cards. Hence why most of the cards, or I believe almost all of the content cards that I have in this deck are Zatsudan. Stargazing, Zatsudan. Edgelord Behavior, Zatsudan. Math Stream, Zatsudan. Gorilla Stream, Zatsudan. Yapping, Zatsudan. So very easily, in the mid game, you can drop Yapping down onto the board and it will be a 3-bit 10 influence card, which, again, is insane bit for influence value. And then finally, once you have included full playsets of all of these cards in your 40-card deck, you still have 2 flex spots. And there are a number of options that you can choose to include into your deck just in case. Now, one option is to include Donathon, a 7-bit green Zatsudan content card that has 10 influence with an activated ability that says gain 1 bit for each platform where you have at least 1 content card. Worst case scenario, you can gain 1 bit at your own, at any point in time of your own choice during the middle of a clash, possibly. Best case scenario, you can gain 3 all of a sudden in the middle of a clash when you're, in the middle of clashing over a platform, etc., etc., etc. And you can surprise your opponent by suddenly playing something when they thought that you were done for the turn. Then you also have Parasocial Trap, a purple experience action card that also costs 7 and says, play only during a clash, you may steal 1 popularity token at this platform. So the way that works is you gain 1 popularity token while you remove one of your opponents. And you can use this as a way of suddenly sniping a win where your opponent thought that you were 1 short. Now, both of these cards are a little awkward because, again, like I said before, NASA's Tier 2 upgrade gives you 6 bits at the beginning of every round. And generally, if you want NASA to be, strong by virtue of having 0 bits, you'd like to ideally be able to spend 6 bits each round. And since both of these cards cost 7, it's going to necessitate you kind of gimping your strategy for an entire turn by spending 5 bits at most and not going down to 0 bits, where NASA is at her most powerful. However, as an alternative that may fix that, a card that you can play in order to fix that, you have Dragon D's, a purple experience content card that costs 6 bits, has 8 influence, and says, when played, choose an opposing content card on this platform to lose 4 influence this round. Basically, it helps you by giving you a lead of 12 bits, the 8 attached to it, as well as the debuff of -4 that it inflicts on one of your opponent's content cards for that round. And then, at the start of the refresh phase, if your persona is NASA, you may return this card to your hand, meaning that now, the next turn, you have an easy way of spending all 6 of your bits, and then using the when played effect to debuff one of your opponent's content cards all over again. Wait, I did not say that. I did not say that. Chem has becoming quite uwu today. Perhaps. There are other cards / will there be cards that snowball if they stick to one platform? Oh yes, absolutely. And we're going to be going through some of them later on in the stream. And so, when you put all of these together, you have 2 flex spots you can fill with any combination of these 3 cards, generally speaking. And when you put all of them together, you get the fully fledged, fully complete, pretty oppressive, especially in the early to mid game, NASA Homerus deck. Not only will your aim be to go broke with your own bit total, but once you do, there is a very high chance that you will make your opponent just as homeless as you are by forcing them to move their persona and or content cards to platforms where they are useless. And so this is the deck list if you are a NASA fan, or if this play pattern appeals to you, if you are an aggro player when it comes to TCGs, then I highly recommend picking up this deck and trying it out for yourself against somebody who's willing to play it with you in the probably in the tabletop, because that's, again, accessible to everybody and accessible for free. But one of the things with this, one of the weaknesses that you have with this deck, and this is a weakness that you have with any deck, is that, usually speaking, one of the limitations that Oshi push and most TCGs place on their players is, once you play a card, or once a card goes into your discard pile, you can't then continue to get value out of it, right? Once it's in the trash, it stays there, and you have relatively few ways of interacting with it. With NASA, you have to make sure that when you're playing a card, when you're using it, tossing it from your hand, for example, to use its discard effect, you have to make sure that you're doing so at the right time, because if you use it at the wrong time, you can't really get it back from your trash. However, one persona that has a very consistent way of breaking that fundamental limitation in the game is Leah. Now, when you look at the 2 cards that are specific to Leah, right, her exclusive content card, Feat, a Holy Deep Dive, and her synergistic action card, which is Internet Historian, that returns 2 content cards from your trash back to your hand. There are 2 strengths that Leah has built into her possible cards that stand out to you. First, influence debuffs. In other words, so long as you have more influence on a platform than your opponent does, you get significant, really powerful rewards as a result of that. You know, drawing 2 cards is a massive deal in Oshi Push. And on top of that, you also have recycling mechanics, meaning that just because a card is in your discard pile, it doesn't mean that you can't use them for the rest of the game, because you can simply just get them back. That's partly why I called it the Necro deck, short for Necromancy, because, you know, just because a card is in the trash doesn't mean it's gone forever. Second reason is because the first person I saw play this deck was Necro, the Leah's main clipper, and it was the game that he played against Maulington that was the first one of Maulington's Oshi Push streams that I ended up watching. And so, when it comes to the synergies that are built into this deck, it starts with content and card draw. Now, when you look at Leah's tier 2 upgrade, it costs 7 bits. However, it gains the added effect of the first time you play a content card each round, Leah gets +4 influence, and you draw 1 card. And it also has the discard effect of moving your persona onto another platform. So, in other words, once you upgrade Leah to her tier 2 upgrade, every time you play a content card, for the first time at least during each round, it replaces itself, which means that you don't get put at a card disadvantage just for playing the game, which is a pretty major hurdle that gatekeeps the power level of most other decks. And then, of course, you have Feat, a Holy Deep Dive, which dictates that so long as you win a Clash reward with it on the platform, you get to draw 2 cards. So Leah has very consistent card draw so long as you're able to, 1, play content cards, and 2, win clashes at a huge, well, not a huge, but a significant influence disparity. And when it comes to imposing that influence disparity, then you get into the next part of the synergies that are included in this deck, which are debuffs and removal. I've included a lot of content cards in this deck that either reduce the influence of opposing content cards or outright just delete them. For example, Adpocalypse is a purple creative content card that costs 1 bit, gives 3 influence, but also has the effect that, when played, 1 opposing content card on this platform loses 2 influence this round. Now the debuff is temporary, but it combos very neatly with edgelord behavior, because let's say your opponent has a content card that has 7 influence. You can't delete it using edgelord behavior because it can only delete things that have 5 influence or less. However, if you combo edgelord behavior with Adpocalypse by playing Adpocalypse first, what you can do is reduce that content card's influence from 7 down to 5, and hey presto, now you can target it using edgelord behavior. Same thing applies to Dog Food Regret, a purple creative content card that costs 3 bits, gives 4 influence, but also permanently reduces opposing content cards' influence by -2. Now, not only is this an aura effect, an aura type effect, which remains in play so long as the card itself is in play, but this is a debuff that applies to every opposing content card on the same platform. Which means that it scales up in terms of effectiveness depending on how many content cards your opponent has already invested into the platform. If they have 3 content cards, it inflicts a total of -6 influence in terms of, the overall platform totals. If they have 5 content cards, it inflicts -10 influence on the entire platform. And again, that permanent debuff of -2 means that a whole lot more cards become susceptible to edgelord behaviors when played removal effect. I haven't watched Leah in a very long time, but I still remember her Thresh Feat stream. I had a definitive card list, and Leah had an exclusive platform that lowers the cost of all content cards played on it by 1. I don't think it's on tabletop yet, but it's insane. Oh yeah, absolutely. And once Hero gets the go-ahead to add those into the tabletop sim, that is going to make cards like this way, way more effective. Yeah, reverse Anthem, basically. And then, so you have these, these little packages, right, of synergies based off of, shared effects and effects that play off of one another pretty well across multiple cards. But then, in addition to that, you also have one of my favorite parts of deck building, which is identifying one card that is really fun to play and then figuring out a whole bunch of other cards that might synergize with its effect. And in the Leah deck, there is one such card. A card that I talked about and ranted about during my last Oshi Push deck building stream as well. Burst Date. A purple experience content card that costs 1 bit, has 3 influence, but also has an activated effect that says, if you return this to the top of your deck, you may return 1 content card with 2 or less on this platform to its owner's hand. Now this is a card that has a number of uses, because if you play it on a platform, you can essentially threaten your opponent to, in the middle of a clash, bounce one of their cards back to their hand. Now, if you choose to bounce a card that costs 2 bits, you essentially have achieved a bit positive value trade, where for the price of 1 bit, you've removed a card that costs 2. However, if you're in the middle of a clash, the usage of that bounce effect can pivot to trying to get rid of a card that might cost 2 bits or less, but gives more influence than just 3. In other words, if your opponent has, let's say, stargazing in play, let me just fetch that card back from the earlier slide. There we go. Let's say your opponent has a stargazing in play. This is 1 bit, same thing as first date, but it gives 6 influence instead of 3. If you wait until the middle of the if you wait until the middle of a clash, then you choose to activate first date's effect. Yes, you lose 3 influence over that platform because this sends itself to the top of your deck. But you also make your opponent lose 6 influence. All of a sudden, they are now at a 3 influence deficit compared to you, and they can't replay stargazing from their hand until the next turn. However, that's just when you use it to threaten to bounce your opponent's cards from their side of the platform. You can also, because it says return 1 content card, doesn't specify opposing, you can also use this on your own content cards on the same platform. Now, again, consider Adpocalypse and Edgelord behavior, both of those costing 2 or less. What you can do is you can play Adpocalypse, you can play Edgelord behavior, and then use their when played effects. Then, if your opponent then plays another card that you would like to get rid of, you can play First Date, bounce one of those prior 2 to your hand, and then use their effect all over again. Same thing applies to Encore Performance, a green creative content card that costs 2 bits, has 4 influence, but has an added effect that says, when played, you may return 1 card, any card, from your trash to your hand. All of these cards cost 2 or less. All of these cards can be bounced and reused using First Date, which is a disgusting amount of utility for just one innocuous content card that only costs 1 bit and only gives 3 influence. However, there's more discard, there's more trash interaction than just Encore Performance, which is, and this is where the late game for this deck starts to kick in. Halloween Special is a green creative content card that costs 8 bits, but gives you 14 influence and has an activated effect that says, when you activate it, you may play 1 action card from your trash with 3 bits or less, that cost 3 bits or less, for free. Now, I think it was, I can't remember if it was Purple Guy or Mio who asked this earlier on in terms of, are there any cards that become stronger the longer they stay on the platform for? This is an example of one of those cards. Because since you can use this effect once every round, that basically means that you get the effect of a card that costs 3 or less for free once every round. And there are some pretty disgusting effects that you can use in order to combo with this card. Now, obviously, since it requires you to play an action card from your trash, you are either going to have to play them, or, alternatively, if you don't want to spend the bits in order to play them first, if you just want them in your trash pile so that you can use them with Halloween Special, you also have Original Song, a purple creative content card that costs 2 bits, has 4 influence, but has a clash reward that says, draw 1 card, then discard 1 card. Essentially what this allows you to do is every time you win a clash with this content card on the platform, you get to filter through your deck by drawing 1 card and then discarding any card from your hand of your choice. And that is one easy way that you could get action cards that you would like to play using Halloween Special into your discard pile without actually having to spend the bits to play them first. However, you then may ask, what are these action cards that are so powerful when played for free, and at a rate of once per turn? There are 4 that I've chosen to include in this deck, and each of them cater to a different thing that you can do if you so choose. They all have different functionalities, and they all allow you to pull off some pretty broken things in the game. The first is Economy. Using Sponsorship, a green creative action card that costs 1 bit and says,
One of your content cards on this platform, on any platform of your choice, gains Clash Reward, gain 3 bits. So this is easy economy generation, or easy resource generation. Especially when you play it for free. That basically means that so long as you're able to actually win a clash with the content card that you chose using sponsorship, you can go up by 3 bits, an additional 3 bits, every single round. Then you also have platform hopping using Potion, which Leah has access to because it is a purple action card. And then you have the recycling that I mentioned with Internet Historian earlier on. Now, imagine instead of having to spend 1 card from your hand in order to get back 2 cards from your trash, you just use a card that was already in your trash to add 2 cards to your hand. One of the things that makes Leah so potentially broken is the fact that she is one of the few personas that has the ability to basically use the trash pile as an extension of her hand, which means that she's not limited to only being able to play with 7 cards at a time, as every other persona is. And then finally, you have Debuff, Diss Track, a purple creative action card that costs 3 bits and says you may reduce the influence of 1 opposing content card on any platform to 0 this clash. And this is your late game. Kendra, welcome to the stream. Welcome in, Kendra Raiders. We're talking about Oshi Push, the Phase Connect, well, as of right now, the Phase Connect TCG, and possible strategies and decks that you can build using the cards in this game. Now, the reason why Diss Track is such broken scaling into the late game is this works with any influence total. It doesn't matter whether a content card that you have selected using Diss Track gives 10 influence or gives 1 influence. Either way, it's getting reduced down to 0. And once you play Diss Track, that also combos with Edgelord behavior to turn something that would usually only be able to remove cards that have 5 influence or less to being a 2-bit card, 2-bit content card that can remove pretty much any content card that your opponent has played, regardless of how big it is. And again, once any of these action cards are in your trash, you can keep playing them using Halloween Special so long as Special itself remains in play. I don't know about sponsorship because it feels a bit win more compared to the other options. It's more so about, I suppose, it does require you to be a bit more discerning in terms of when you choose to play it, in terms of the risk that you choose to take by, spending 1 bit to essentially give yourself a clash reward that gives you more bits. But if you manage to choose the right time to play it, i.e. when your opponent doesn't have any way of removing the content card or suddenly winning the clash, then it is the most effective method of bit generation per card from hand that you have access to in the game. But I see what you mean in terms of saying that it's it's a kind of win more type card, because I agree that it can look that way sometimes. And so when you put, does Halloween does not bypass the only used during a clash thing, because that is built into the action card that you're playing, not the content card that you're using to play the action card. So you still have to abide by the play only during a clash clause. However, again, since Activate can be used at any stage during the round, that doesn't really hold you back too much. And so when you put all of this together, you end up with a deck that is pretty much impossible to outvalue or to run out of value. Because every single time Leah invests in a platform, even if she ends up capturing it and all the cards get put in the trash, she can just get them back. Or, in the case of Halloween Special and action cards, she doesn't even need to put them back into her hand before she can play them all over again. Again, very, very broken mechanic given certain situations, depending on whether your opponent has any answer to these cards. Halloween Special when the inevitable graveyard hose deck enters the card pool. Yeah. Oh no, I'm one guy. There's no problem. If you want to ask about any sort of rules clarification or anything like that, I'm more than happy to answer. That's the whole point of the stream, after all. However, there is one weakness of this strategy, which is when you have access to this many cards that you could possibly play, you run into a problem where you don't have enough bits in order to play all of these cards. Leah has one of her biggest strength is her ability to access her trash as a way of replaying cards, etc., etc. But if you don't have the bits to play those cards, that access is throttled in terms of how abusable it really is. And that's where the next deck archetype comes into play. Because what if you had a way of essentially bypassing that entire restriction that is one of the most fundamental power gates in the entire game? How many bits you have access to. Because again, what you can play is limited by how many bits you have. So, what if you had a way of getting infinite bits? And that's exactly what the Iori Infinite deck does. Now, those who watched my previous stream about Oshi push deck building will know that I already made an infinite deck using Tenma. However, there are two aspects to Iori specifically that make her just as much, if not a more effective user of this particular strategy. First is the fact that Iori has access to the cheapest upgrade in the game. All of the other personas require at least 3 bits in order to upgrade their personas to their tier 1 upgrade, which increases the amount of bits they generate each turn to 4 instead of 3. Iori's only costs 2. It more than makes up for its own cost by essentially giving double the amount that you use to play it the very next round. So, again, if you want easy economy, then Iori is ideal for that. And the second thing is, once you get to her tier 2 upgrade, which costs 6 bits in order to play, she gains the effect of the first time you play an action card during each round, Iori gains +4 influence and you draw 1 card. And that consistent card draw every time you play an action card makes it very easy to dig through your deck at your own discretion, as opposed to Tenma's Clash Reward, which admittedly does allow you to draw potentially multiple cards at once, but only allows you to do so if you win a clash on the same platform as she's on. And so, thing is, if you're going to be playing a combo deck, obviously you want the ability to draw the combo pieces. And that's the first part of Iori's, first packet of synergies that I've included in this Iori deck. You have Embrace Scuff, a green creative action card that costs 2 bits and says, 1 content card of your choice gains +7 influence this clash. Then, if it is on an independent platform, also draw 1 card. Now, I've built this deck so that it has all of the platform cards that I've put into the platform deck for this deck are independent platforms, which means that if you have a tier 2 Iori upgrade, this can potentially draw you 2 cards for just 2 bits. And then, obviously, 1 content card of your choice gains +7 influence. It helps to make sure you don't lose too quickly in the early game by still giving you some way of maintaining an influence lead. Second, Killer Hands. Reveal a green Pogger's action card that costs 2 bits and says, reveal the top 4 cards of your deck, draw 1 action card from among them and put the rest on the bottom of your deck. If your persona is Iori, draw 2 action cards from among them instead. Basically, yet again, another 2-bit draw 2. And finally, you have Microphone Upgrade, a green experience action card that costs 4 bits but says, your persona gains +5 influence this clash and you draw 2 cards. Again, with Iori's tier 2 upgrade, this is a 4-bit draw 3, which is, again, very, very strong and allows you to dig through a lot of your deck. Then, of course, you need enough bits to play the combo. The aim of this deck is to get to at least 11 bits stored up in your bank, and to help you get there, you have 2 action cards that double as card draw when you have tier 2 Iori upgrade, but also allow you to generate more bits. Sponsorship, which we've already talked about. If you can snipe a Clash Reward using sponsorship, you accelerate your game plan significantly. but also Freeze Spit, a green creative action card that costs 1 bit but says gain 2 bits. Then if your persona is Uruka, the next content card you play this round costs 1 less. We're not playing Uruka, so that second part of the effect is irrelevant, but what is important is that for the price of 1 card in your hand, it allows you to gain 1 additional bit, a net 1 positive. And so, once you've dug through your deck, once you've managed to save up to 11 bits, that's when you actually drop the combo. When you get to 11 bits, so long as your opponent doesn't have an answer, which can happen quite frequently in this game, you get to essentially change the way that you play for the rest of the game, using this combo of Mama Cameo and Clip Out of Context. Mama Cameo is a green experience action card that costs 3 bits, has 4 influence, but also has an activated effect that says, return this to your hand, gain 2 bits. Now, usually this would be a pretty underwhelming way of making it so that it usually refunds 2 out of the 3 bits that it cost you, while only providing 4 influence. So it becomes a 1 bit 4 influence type content card. However, it can combine with Clip Out of Context for some pretty disgusting things. Clip Out of Context is a green Zatsudan content card that costs 10 bits. Highest cost, I think it's the highest cost card in the game as of right now. However, it has a lot of, for those 10 bits, it gives you a whopping 21 influence. But the real strength of this card is its effect. It has 2. A passive effect, which says that content cards cost you 2 less to play on other platforms, and this effect remains in play so long as Clip Out of Context is in play. But also, when you play this card, you may play content cards on other platforms as though your persona were there this round. In other words, not only does it discount the cost of content cards that you play on other platforms, the turn that you play Clip Out of Context, it allows you, when played, to play cards on other platforms without having to have your persona be there at the same time. Now, again, some of you may have already realized by looking at these 2 cards what the combo is. Clip Out of Context reduces Mama Cameo's cost from 3 down to 1. Except once Mama Cameo is already in play, if you activate its effect, it gives you 2, a net positive of 1 bit, even after casting it. And there is no limit on how many times you can play a single content card from your hand in the same round. Which means that so long as your opponent doesn't have any way of removing Mama Cameo or Clip Out of Context, you can keep looping this effect until you have infinite bits. And once you have infinite bits, the game completely changes. Because now you go from having to worry about how many bits you can use to, play cards or whatever, to now trying to figure out the most broken effects you can abuse with no cost besides the cards in your hand. And so once you have access to infinite bits, then you start looking for other infinite loops. And when you're playing green, especially, there are a few infinite combos that you can access once you've already gotten this one off. The first is the combination of beating you with a frying pan ASMR, a green experience action card that costs 8 bits and says return all content cards in play to their owner's hands, and Encore Performance, which, as I've stated before, is a green creative action card that costs 2 bits, has 4 influence, but allows you to return 1 card, any card, from your trash to your hand. Essentially, when you play both of these in sequence, of first playing Beating You with the Frying Pan ASMR, then using Encore Performance to return Frying Pan ASMR to your hand, you get infinite bounces. Because every single time you play Beating Frying Pan, you can just return it to your hand using Encore Performance. And then you can replay Beating You with a Frying Pan, which even though it sends itself to your trash pile, it puts Encore Performance back into your hand. And since you have infinite bits, it doesn't matter that this sequence costs you 10 bits every time. Because, again, infinity minus 10 is still infinity. And the thing is, right, when you have this ability to bounce content cards to your hands an infinite number of times, all you're missing is that when you put these two cards together, if you combine them with literally any other content card that has a when played effect, you can activate its when played effect an infinite number of times as well. And this is where the actual win condition for the deck comes into play. Because yes, getting to infinite bits is funny and degenerate, but it doesn't win the game all on its own. You still need to be able to do something with those infinite bits. Now, one of the things that you can do is infinite card draw, because Marshmallows is a green Zatsudan content card that costs 3 bits, has 4 influence, but has the effect that when you play it, you get to draw 1 card. The sequence goes as follows. First, you play Beating You with a Frying Pan ASMR. Then, you play Encore Performance, returning Beating You with a Frying Pan ASMR back to your hand. Then, you play Marshmallows, drawing you a card. Then, you play Beating You with a Frying Pan again, which returns both of these cards to your hand. Then, you replay those 2 cards, Encore Performance and Marshmallows, and you repeat this cycle over and over until you reach maximum hand size. However, that's not the extent of it. And by the way, this is also usually why you want to wait to combo off. Well, you want to wait until you have Marshmallows in your hand before you combo off, or Marshmallows in your discard pile before you combo off, so that you can retrieve it using Encore Performance. In addition to making sure that you can draw the entirety of your deck, you can also use this combination to make sure that your opponent for the rest of the game has no way of responding to what you're doing. Because since Beating You with a Frying Pan ASMR returns all content cards in play to their owner's hands, what that means is you put your opponent in a position where both you and them now have no content cards on the board, have all of the cards in your hand, but only you have the ability to keep replaying them. Your opponent does not have the same luxury. And when those cards are stuck in their hand, the logical thing to do to make sure that they have no way of getting back into the game is to make them discard those cards. And that's the second half of the win condition, which is, in addition to giving you this combo, giving you infinite draw, this combo can also give you infinite discard. Batsu Bracket is a green Poggers content card that costs 7 bits, gives you 10 influence, but when played, causes each opponent to discard 2 cards from their hand. You repeat the exact same sequence. First, you play Beating You with a Frying Pan ASMR, returning yours and your opponent's content cards back to their hand. Then, you play Encore Performance, retrieving Beating You with a Frying Pan ASMR. Then, you play Batsu Bracket, causing your opponent to discard 2 cards from their hand. Then, you replay Frying Pan ASMR, bouncing both Encore Performance and Batsu Bracket back to your hand. Then, you make them discard another 2 while retrieving Frying Pan ASMR. Rinse and repeat until they have no cards left in hand. And you can do this, like I said, an infinite number of times, so long as you're holding Beating You with a Frying Pan ASMR at any stage for the rest of the game. Now, this is all very, well and good, right? Making it so that your opponent has no cards left in their hand. But there's also another broken interaction between Beating You with a Frying Pan ASMR and Clip Out of Context. Because the thing that allows you to play content cards on any platform when Clip Out of the round that Clip Out of Context is played stays in effect even if Clip Out of Context itself is not on the board, because it's a when played effect. What you can essentially do is play Clip Out of Context on one platform, then play Frying Pan ASMR, and then replay Clip Out of Context after the combo has given you infinite bits on any other platform of your choice, because it now benefits from its own when played effect. So you essentially have a 21 influence cruise missile that you can send to any platform during the content phase. However, that's not all, because in addition to having an infinite content combo by combining Frying Pan ASMR and Encore Performance, you also have an infinite action combo, where you can thread, which you can play so long as you have 2 copies of Encore Performance in your hand. The sequence goes as follows. First, you play Beating You with a Frying Pan ASMR. Then, you play an Encore Performance returning Frying Pan ASMR to your hand. Then, you play an action card, whatever action card you like of your choice. Then, you play another Encore Performance, retrieving that action card back to your hand. Now, you are in a board state where 2 Encore Performances are on the board. Then you replay Beating You with a Frying Pan ASMR, returning both Encore Performances back to your hand. And then you replay that sequence over and over. The reason why being able to replay any action card of your choice is so potent, where you combine it with everything else that this deck can do once you get to infinite bits, is Iori has access to Big Cheese, a red Poggers action card that costs 4 bits and says, if you are dominating this platform, you may gain 1 popularity token on this platform. In other words, in the off chance that your opponent somehow doesn't lose all of the influence that they hold over a platform, you can accelerate the win by not having to go through the conventional strategy of winning via influence. And so long as you have more content cards loaded onto a platform during the clash than your opponent does, you can spam Big Cheese in order to just auto-win the platform, auto-capture the platform. Now, the other card that you can include, if you are running a platform deck of all independent platforms, is Mahjong Tournament, a purple Poggers content card that costs 7 bits, gives you 10 influence, but has the effect that, when played, if it is played on an independent platform, you may delete one opposing content card on any platform. If somehow your opponent has a content card in play that stops you from, pulling off the combo, as is quite possibly the case, you could play Mahjong Tournament in order to remove that content card and then open the way for you to essentially combo off and run away with the rest of the game. Mahjong is neck-breaking OTK territory, yes. This is the kind of bullshit as a Yu-Gi-Oh player I'm used to. Now, this is the blue player overloading Cyclonic Rift every time they play it? Yeah, pretty much. Now, I don't want to give the impression that this is a combo deck that has no counterplay, because there is plenty of counterplay. If, for example, your opponent is able to snipe Mama Cameo and you don't have any way of, you don't either have a second copy or you don't have the bits to try replaying it during the same turn that you played Clip out of context, then the combo is basically dead in the water, at least for a little while. If they remove Clip out of context, then the combo is just dead, period. If they have a content card, like for example, they have one in the game already that is called Craftsure, that has the stated ability of so long as this card is in play, players can only play 1 content card every round, which kills this combo outright. However, again, if your opponent doesn't have one of those answers or happens to not have one of those answers in hand when you play this combo and you get to infinite bits, then yes, the things that you can do are broken and truly disgusting to see. And so when you put all of this together, you get one of the most consistent, one of the most hilarious combo decks that you can play in the game. If you are a combo player, if you are someone who likes to do absurd things for the price of having to play like a bit of a bitch in the early game, then this is a deck for you. Regardless of whether you like to play mid-range, value, combo, or aggro, Oshi Push has a playstyle, a deck, and a persona that you can use, that is basically built just for you. Regardless of who your origins Oshi is, there is a whole bunch of deck lists and deck archetypes that are just waiting to be picked up if you choose to go looking. And so, at the end of all of this, I do have a little bit of a disclaimer. right? We didn't have the, no harassment warning as with the beginning of most streams, but still, a tiny disclaimer. All of these decks were made without the full card list, because the remaining cards in set 1 have not been added to the tabletop sim mod that I was using in order to deck build. They will be added at some point in the future, I hope in the near future, but they haven't been added in yet. And when they are added in, these decks are probably going to change. So if anyone's watching this for inspiration to make their own decks in the same tabletop sim mod, I ask you to use these deck lists as a guide for your own customization, as a jumping off point, because they will be outdated as soon as Hero adds in all of the rest of the cards. And once you have access to the rest of the cards, feel free to customize to your heart's desire. But again, I cannot state enough how much depth they thought to put into this game, and that is the reason why I've become so addicted. Yes, it's perfectly, it's perfectly understandable if you're only interested in this card game because you are, you're a FaZe fan and all the art and all the references are really cute. But if you do want to pick it up as a game to play, there is more than enough actual mechanics, synergies, deck building, nuance for you to be able to enjoy a whole new aspect of Oshi Push besides just that. Now, some of you may also want to figure out how you can play it online and for free, and don't worry. The way that I got addicted to this game was just playing the tabletop simulator version of it. So if you go on to the tabletop sim workshop, there are 3 Oshi Push mods available. The 2 that are important are Oshi Push Debut Edition 2-player mode, which is by Vise and Chill, like I talked about before, which contains the 2 starter decks, the Pippa and Temma starter decks that you can use to get a grasp of the main mechanics of the game before you can start loading in your own decks to play against any opponent that's willing to hop onto tabletop sim with you. And also Oshi Push Manager Pitch Deck, which is by Hero, who's in chat right now. This is just with a limited copy. Yeah, exactly. Made by Hero, which contains all of the cards, well, most of the cards, the overwhelming majority of the cards that are part of set 1, and which you can use to build your own decks and really get immersed in terms of card combinations, synergies, strategies, etc., etc. You can make your own custom decks using this mod. And again, both of them are free. If I'm being completely honest, without these 2 mods being available so that I could play the game online and for free, I probably would not have gotten addicted to this game the way that I have or at this point in time. And if you don't want to wait until, if you don't want to wait for physical product, or if it's not sold near you or whatever, then this is a very convenient and easy way that you can start playing Oshi Push, so long as you have somebody else who is, who's just as willing to play the game as you are. Yeah, for free. And finally, as some of you who saw my community post will already know, in the aftermath of the interview with Akiko, she asked me to fill out an affiliate application form. I promised her I would actually fill it out properly, and I did. Lo and behold, your boy is now an official Oshi Push affiliate. If you wish to order any Oshi Push products, if you wish to pre-order any Oshi Push products, if you go to the description of this stream, you will find my official affiliate link, and I will be receiving a commission on all of the products that you order through that link. So if you choose to order anything, you will be supporting your addiction and my addiction at the same time. And on top of that, if you're looking to get your hands on one of the beautiful Oshi Push portfolios that they have, the full set of 6 costs $300, which is a steep price admittedly, but you can buy them individually as well, so that you only get the portfolio for your specific Origins Oshi. They've extended the merch drop until August 7th, so for a whole other week. If you're looking to buy one of these push folios, if that is something that you would like to get your hands on, please use my affiliate link to order it, and you will be supporting my shilling and my addiction to this game thus far and going into the future. Because I'll be honest, I don't see it going away anytime soon. Do you get a reseller discount for yourself? I don't think so. I don't think so. But for the time being, at least, I'm very content with just playing the tabletop sim version while using the cards as a mostly collector item. When Oshi Push starts making it into the hands of more players and when the secondary market emerges, then I will probably look to start buying singles in order to craft the decks that I've already played and tested using the tabletop sim mods. However, again, link in description, buy through the link to support me, and yeah, that is Oshi Push. If you want to pick up the game, if you're interested in the game portion of the TCG rather than just the cards themselves, then there is a lot that is waiting to be broken down, discovered, and a lot of room for you to express yourself as a TCG player according to whatever strategies you choose to build around and whatever strategies you choose to rep. Control, combo, aggro, mid-range, all of that is on the table. All of that is for you. And I hope this stream has been somewhat informative. Admittedly, there were a few points where I think my explanation of the mechanics might have been a little convoluted, perhaps. However, if you are interested in a more concise, more structured, I suppose, explanation of the game and its mechanics, etc., I highly recommend going over to check Lord Morlington's channel, where he has a video. He recently uploaded a video, I think as recently as 2 days ago, where he broke down the mechanics of the game, as well as providing custom deck lists of his own. A Pippa deck, an Uruka deck, and a Tenma deck, if I remember correctly. So, all three personas being the ones that we haven't talked about in this stream. So if if any of those three are your Oshi and you would like to go check them out, then I highly recommend going over to Morlington's channel and watching his video on it as well. And in case, again, you want to see actual gameplay, Oshi Push gameplay, I will be hopping onto Morlington's stream tomorrow for our weekly Oshi Push face-off, where I will be playing a game of Oshi Push versus multiple games of Oshi Push versus Lord Morlington, in order to test out a few deck brews that both he and I have come up with over the last month or so. So, if you are interested in that, the waiting room for it is already up on his channel, so tune into that tomorrow. And yeah, I hope that has done a good enough job of kind of really explaining just how much of a game there is to be enjoyed here. Oh, it's digital booster packs. Crack is cheaper, every TCG player. Yes. Only 2 blood so far? Yeah. Nowhere close to sorta time? Yeah. This is a pretty short stream, but there wasn't... I didn't want to go too long in terms of explaining how the game works, so it should be pretty brief. I will be timestamping this later on today, and maybe timestamping the gorilla that we did yesterday as well, if I have the time. But yeah, thank you for tuning in to this stream, and hopefully if there are any cardboard crack addicts among you, Oshi Push has earned your attention as a card game that you might be interested in playing, and playing for free at that. Alright, hold on. Let me see if there's anyone who's streaming at the moment that I can raid you guys into. Brave is freezing on me, which is a little annoying, but... damn, there's a lot of people who are live at the moment. I might send you guys off to... Actually... Oh, wait, Pippa's live. All right, hold on. I'll send you guys over to Pippa, which is probably, probably quite a poetic conclusion to the stream. All right, she's currently doing a react stream to Carnival of Souls. Now you have to yap for 10 minutes. We'll save that for next week's stream. Billy, thank you for the 5. Please ask Akiko for a card with only feet in the artwork. You're gonna have to do that yourself. But where are the stun decks? Oh, okay. So, hold on. Let me pull up the tweet. Actually, I am glad that you asked that because I think Pippa replied to the tweet that I posted announcing that I was doing the stream. But hold on, let me find it. So, yeah, so Pippa asked if there was a stall deck, right? Because she wanted to play stall. I never would have guessed that. It seems so funny to think about the fact that Pippa is like a stall slash. I don't know if she's full on control, but the fact that she likes playing stall is just a thought that really tickles me. But to answer your question, Purple Guy, yes, there is a stall deck in the game, or at least one stall deck in the game, and that is a deck that I talked about during the first deck building, Oshi Push deck building stream that I did. A Tenma deck that is half tempo and half basically revolving around bouncing your opponent's content cards back into their hand in the middle of a clash. So that effectively all of their content cards cost double. And it is kind of neat that apparently Pippa's favorite archetype is very effectively embodied in the Tenma deck. In a Tenma deck, I should say. But let me pull up the deck list for that. Let me just go over to the slides for the last Oshi Push stream that I did, and I'll show that off to you guys. I'll just go over a brief explanation of how it works as well. Hold on. There we go. Right. Let me just pop this back. The deck I affectionately refer to as Tenma Balls, because the whole aim of the deck is to bounce cards back into your opponent's hand. So, let me just give you guys the breakdown of this all over again. Oh, sorry, give me a second. There we go. There we go. Pippa stall deck. Interesting. Look, Control is the TCG master race. We are hated because we are correct. Okay, hold on. Alright, so this is the stall deck. Right. Stall is more floodgates, like taxes and summoning limits. Oh yeah, this deck has that as well. So, the way that the deck works is you run First Date, right? As I talked about already, it is a card that you play in order to threaten your opponent with bouncing a content card that they also have on their side of the platform back into their hand. You have Succumb to Cringe, which basically returns a content card that costs 3 or less back to their hand as well, which we've already talked about. Again, capping the amount of influence that they're allowed to have on the platform at any one time. You have Yell at Fish for the same reason. You have Math Stream, which taxes your opponent by increasing the cost of cards they play by 1. And you have Peaceful ASMR as a finisher, which allows you to bounce any card, regardless of size, back to your opponent's hand when you play it. Or even another card that you have in on the platform back to your hand if for whatever reason you would like to do that. Encore Performance allows you to recycle cards from your trash, and it combos with First Date in order to keep doing that over and over. You also have Cinema Date, which is a 4-cost, a red experience content card that costs 4, only has 2 influence, but also has the added effect that during a clash at the platform that it's on, if you are dominating the platform, then opposing content cards don't contribute any influence on this platform. In other words, if you have a bunch of cheap content cards on one platform, and then your opponent drops a high-cost, massive influence content card onto the same platform, you can essentially reduce that influence down to 0 simply by playing Cinema Date. Because so long as you have more cards than they do, more content cards than they do on the same platform, then regardless of how much influence their content cards give, it all gets reduced down to 0 during the clash. So, yeah, and in addition to that, it's just filling out, the rest of the deck is filled out with cards that provide high amount of influence for a relatively low amount of bits. Things like Origins Video, a 3-cost red experience content card that gives 6 influence, but with the added ability that when you play an experience content card, including this one, this card gains +2 influence this round. So essentially, the turn that you play it, and every turn afterwards where you play a content card gives you at least +8 influence for only 3 bits. You also have Puzzle Handcam, an experience content card that basically can't be deleted because it just gets returned back to your hand instead, which allows you to maintain a big hand size, as well as also being a cheap experience content card that you can play in order to buff Origin's video over and over. And then also Courtroom Roleplay, which we've already talked about before. 2 bits for usually 7 influence, a very good value deal. And then the rest of it is just Tenma upgrades, plus card draw and or economy in the form of sponsorship and microphone upgrade. So yeah, if you're interested in playing Stall, I highly recommend playing this. Actually, Pippa, if Pippa really wants like a stall deck, not like, you know, half stall, half tempo, when they release the full list of cards in set 1 onto the mod, Michiru and Nasa have possibly the strongest stall decks, and I mean the true definition of stall as an archetype that you can get. Because after they release the full list of set 1 cards, both Nasa and Michiru are going to have access to cards that not only stop your opponent from being able to play cards onto the board, but also cards that allow you to delay the rate at which they win and capture platforms by shuffling around popularity tokens between different platforms. Now, if that sounds insanely aggravating to you, I guarantee that's exactly how it plays. So yeah, once they release the full list, I'll be coming back to this and then creating a proper stall deck so that players like Pippa will be able to pick that up and enjoy the game that way. But yeah, no, it is endlessly amusing to me that Pippa seems to want to play a deck archetype that is as infuriating as Stall. Whereas the Oshi Push community, if you go onto Oshi Push's official website, you will have a link that will take you to the Japanime Discord, and in the Discord, they have a specific channel that is dedicated to Oshi Push, which you can go into and discuss things like, you know, deck strategy and and the like. But yeah, Pippa, I don't know if this is going to be, if this deck specifically is going to be to Pippa's taste, because like I said, it's only half stall. However, once they release the full card set, I am going to be able to put together a full dedicated stall deck, which is either under Michiru, whose persona I haven't given a deck list for just yet, or Nasa, which is a completely different way of playing the game to the Nasa deck that I just introduced to you guys. But that's the beauty of this game. You can play any persona in any number of different ways. So we'll have to wait for that one, but once it does happen, I'll make another post on Twitter, and hopefully Pippa will see it. All right. In the meantime, thank you again for tuning into this stream. I hope you found it to be useful, informative, or enough to sort of encourage you to download the mods on tabletop and then start getting into deck building yourself. But now I will be ending this stream, and I will be, well, I'll need to start prepping for next week's stream because it's probably going to be a quite sizable one, all things considered. And if you want to see, again, if you want to see people actually playing Oshi Push, head over to Morlington's channel tomorrow for the stream that we're going to be doing, where I will be playing against him with my own decks versus probably a new Tenma deck that I've cooked to see if it can beat some of the decks that he's bringing to the table. But yeah, in any case, thank you for tuning in again. Behave when you land in Pippa's chat. I want you to blend in seamlessly. And yeah, Otsu Chair. Otsu Chair.